Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe Pasillo. As always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, on the Crusade Channel, let us go into the breach. Joining us on the Crusade Channel, we always thank you. We thank Mike Church for always being gracious and having Joe and Joe on his channel. It is a channel worth subscribing to. Premium membership, crusadechannel.com. Chat room, the only social media out there worth actually socializing in, crusadechannel.com/chat. It's Mike Church and a great lineup that he has down there. We always say at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, the Crusade Channel is not a radio show. It's a cause, and it's a good one. Same with the Frontline with Joe and Joe. That's why Mike Church has us on the air. So we want to thank you all. On our end, Joe and I are really going to the new a higher level with our producer and friend Jonathan Ross, and we have something that we'd like you to get involved with, which is the frontlinetv.com. All right, enough of that YouTube promotion nonsense. All right, we're doing the frontlinetv.com, and you could become a subscriber there again for less than the price of a cup of coffee. And you got a lot of great content above and beyond the Frontline with Joe and Joe. So we would encourage you to support us all, because we're all in the breach. Joe Resinello, do you know that my new bishop now, as of this past Monday, is Bishop Olmsted? All right, because now I am now in Arizona. And you want to know what? He said to go into the breach in an apostolic letter, what was it, 4 years ago? He said men in America need to go into the breach. We took him at his word, along with a good friend, priest friend of ours. And because of the grace of Almighty God and all you wonderful people out there, our word is spreading. And we join Mike Church and many others in trying to change this abominable culture that we live in. And if anybody's, oh, what's so abominable about it? It's so great. Yeah, it's really wonderful. Okay, we're on the 49th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, coming up on a half a century of baby killing. Now, the March for Life was this weekend, and we would be remiss at the Frontline with Joe and Joe if we didn't comment on it ourselves. Okay. Because we want to come at it with a few angles. You know, we feel like very simple people, Joe Resinello, very simple people, not people with grand schemes and grand ideas, but just good down-home people can really move and shake. I'm going to hand this over to you, Joe, because we're going to talk. St. Paul wrote about, we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. You know, in the pro-life movement, Joe, there's a great cloud of witnesses, okay? And I always want to reiterate to our audience on the Crusade Channel and elsewhere, evidence that I always say, on the conservative side, the liberals and the left, they all hate us, and we know that, okay? But on the conservative side, the late Charles Krauthammer, conservative Jewish man, he said if it wasn't for the Catholic Church, abortion would be a dead issue. It would be a dead issue. And he was honest enough to say that it really was the Catholic Church, and it's the people in the pro-life movement and that great cloud of witnesses that kept this issue alive for 50 years, okay? And Glenn Beck, who was a Mormon, okay? And he had said, he blasted his non-Catholic Christian brothers and sisters, and he said, the Catholic Church kept this issue alive. And he said the Protestants failed in keeping this issue alive. And the cloud of witnesses is what we need to be. And there are a lot of them. We're going to point out a few tonight. We're going to point out the not so great. We're particularly going to point out our role, and no offense to all you beautiful, wonderful Catholic and Christian women out there, okay? But men need to open their mouths in this battle over life and our culture in general, okay? Abortion's just one part of the culture war, which we'll get into also. I want to read you something from Fulton Sheen. But in the meantime, I'm handing it over to Joe Resinello.
Well, as Joe said, our headline topic is the role of men in this American abortion holocaust. 63 million children have been aborted in America since 1973. What took place this past week was the 49th March for Life in D.C. I have attended it twice. It's quite an event, and it doesn't get the coverage it deserves. I mean, there are a lot. I never got a count officially. There are a lot of people there, and frankly, it never gets the press that it should.
Well,
so I guess before
why. You know why that happens.
That's
you know,
a given.
The mainstream media, Joe, they make you believe there was 5 people standing on a street
Exactly.
corner.
I mean, it really is quite an event, and it's cold. That's another thing. And still people show up, you know, and sometimes you might even see people. One year, I was behind, what's his face? Santorum. I literally was walking. He was like an arm's distance away from me. People show up. Cardinal Burke has been at the March for Life. O'Malley, Cardinal O'Malley. Like it's a definitely represented event in America. Of course, we get no press. That's why we bring it up. But I want to talk a little bit about that before we get into the main topic, because Austin Roos, who's a friend of our show, we've interviewed him a number of times, who's definitely a lion in the pro-life movement in America, wrote a great article in Crisis Magazine called A Great Cloud of Pro-Life Witnesses. And basically he goes on to talk about how the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is in the Supreme Court right now, could potentially topple Roe. Could topple it. And just so people are clear, if that does happen, and many very, very intelligent people, legal scholars like Robert George, even Alan Dershowitz, who's a self-proclaimed liberal, believes that there is a very good chance that that is going to happen. In fact, Dershowitz is afraid that it's going to happen, but he said very clearly that it could.
Listen, I'm going to just digress for 1 second, Joe. I'm handing it right back to you. Even, and this doesn't get too much press either, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg admitted in an interview that as law, not her personal beliefs, as law, Roe is on very shaky ground. But I'm going to hand it back to you.
So basically, I want to be very clear to people. If that does happen, basically, and this is what Roos discussed, it's going to shift back to the states. That's why New Jersey just passed this, was it freedom, whatever the heck,
whatever,
in the middle of the night, basically, which like enshrined abortion in New Jersey. And frankly, Murphy, if it's a sadistic thing, an action, but it was a smart one. He is ahead of the game. He is not a dummy. And he knows that this could happen. So states like New Jersey, states like California, states like Connecticut, states like Massachusetts, states like Illinois, states like Oregon, states like Washington will have abortion upon demand.
Joe, can I just chime in for a second? What I think is this. The United States of America is not one nation. We say we're one nation under God, and we are not. That's just a statement of reality. That's not a political statement. We are not. We are the most divided now, even amongst in slavery times. We are more divided. Now, this issue happens to be central to it, okay? My attitude is this. For every state, and there'll be more of our states, for every state that's going to be like California, New York, New Jersey, where they do things in the middle of the night, because at the end of the day, Governor Murphy is like some sort of predatory, nocturnal animal who has to do things in the middle of the night. He's like a vampire, Joe. He even looks like a vampire. Did you ever notice that? No, seriously. If he sees the sunlight, I'm sure he starts like burning, like his skin starts to burn and everything. So he's got to do everything in the middle of the night. My attitude is, Lord, forgive me. To hell with them. No, as I understand that, okay, by the grace of God, I'm not there, okay? But my heart is in New Jersey. I understand, okay? To hell with California and Oregon and Washington and New York and Massachusetts. Take care of the states that you're in once it goes back to the states that, by the way, Joe, are going to have triggers that are going to automatically outlaw abortion, some of these states, okay? Some of them will, unfortunately, even the red states, keep abortion legal in a very limited way. But I say those societies, what do you always say in the show, Joe? You'll know them by their fruit. California, New York, New Jersey, God's curse is going to come upon them for doing what they do. We just have to make sure in those states where we do have power, we do not give an inch. I'm going to hand it back to you.
But what I will say is this. This goes to show you the Dobbs case that, and actually my mother used to say this, a case will torpedo it. It's going to happen in the states too. Because even if it's not enshrined on a federal level, individual states, there will be the Dobbs case of California. This is a serious like event that's going to take place in America very shortly. And I'll tell you, I actually think even in the states that have legalized abortion, they're afraid. That's why they're going to try to enshrine it into the Constitution of those states, because when you start talking science, depending upon how this case plays itself through, heartbeat, genetics, it could even get torpedoed there. All it is one lawsuit. It's one lawsuit away. It goes to the Supreme Court of Illinois. It goes to the Supreme Court of California. For the first time in 49 years, the pro-life movement is on the offense, Joe Pasillo. We're not on the defense anymore.
We're not on the defense because the states, remember when, who was it? I forgot if it was Klobuchar tried to club Amy Coney Barrett on the issue of super precedent. That's the liberal talking point. Roe is a super precedent. And ACB really did school her, okay? She said, you know, Marbury versus Madison, that's super precedent. And Brown versus the Board of Education. And she said, well, what do you mean by that? Like with that snarky liberal way. What do you mean by that? What's the super precedent? A case, an issue that where it seems very settled, where you can't imagine anyone wanting to overturn Marbury versus Madison or Brown versus the Board of Education. But we have a country that's severely divided. It is not super precedent, Senator Klobuchar. Okay, so ACB schooled her on that. But the thing is, Joe, I want to pick up on what you said. If in fact, see what we have to look for, if in fact Roe versus Wade and Casey and Doe are going to get overturned in this, as we're talking to you at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello on the Crusade channel at crusadechannel.com, always on air and always online. If it's going to get overturned, then we have to listen for the language. I think is a very important thing for not just the legal people looking at this, but also people like us who are interested in, as you brought up, what does the future hold? If forget about John Roberts, but if the five who are supposedly conservative start talking about the 14th Amendment, okay, the violating the right to life, the 4th and 5th Amendment, taking away a right to life, if they start talking along those lines, then in the future, I think what you were talking about and what we could hope for is that you have a real conservative Supreme Court, okay, minus the disgraziad John Roberts. And what they're going to do is they're going to declare the human being in the womb a person under our Constitution. Ergo, abortion is banned. That is the ultimate goal. Then they could scream and cry all they want in California, in New York. And then as my 82-year-old Italian mother would say to the 22-year-old girl who just wants to go out and get laid and doesn't care if she gets pregnant, hey, it's too bad.
You see, that's the right thing to do. Obviously, if you're a natural law jurist, you would do that. See, I don't think the Supreme Court has the guts. I don't even think that the jurists there's probably Thomas and Alito who do have the guts to do that. You see, you know, the Supreme Court always pretends like they're not political, but they're political.
They're political.
And I mean, Roe was a cultural decision, just like Dred Scott was a cultural decision. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that that was wrong.
Well, can I comment on one thing that Austin Ruse said about exactly what you're saying? And then I'm going to kick it right back to you. He said, we fully understand that the fight then shifts to the states. And I love the way he puts this, Joe, where the fight actually began. Here's the key phrase, Joe Rossinello, and I want your thoughts on this. Before the Supremes got their grubby hands on this. If you weren't going to come out and declare under our Constitution an absolute right to life, okay, and abolish abortion, but and leave it to the states because supposedly it might be a right that they could concoct that belongs to the states, which it does not. We know that, okay. But they went the opposite extreme, Joe Rossinello, in Roe versus Wade. They made the law for us, and I want your comment on this. I love the way Austin Ruse puts it. Before they put their grubby hands on it. Here's what I want you to comment on, Joe. Their grubby hands in the Supreme Court should have never been in the culture war to begin with, from school prayer to contraception to abortion to gay marriage and all of it. But as you said, Dred Scott was a political decision. Probably so was Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay, there was politics involved. They need to get their grubby hands out of our culture war, and if nothing else, back off and let the states fight it out. What do you say?
Well, again, I mean, the court is there to decide cases that are tough. I mean, that's why, you know, you're put there. And I mean, if a case, I mean, I'm not saying you're not right, but what I am saying is when something gets gridlocked, that's when they have to step in. But they're political. I mean, like what did I forget Kennedy's famous line about Roe? It was a famous like conclusion, but to be honest with you, it was moronic. It's moronic coming from a man who went to Stanford Law School. I
Well,
mean, this is the
you're talking about Anthony Kennedy, the
Anthony
justice.
Kennedy. I
Oh, yeah,
forget the
yeah.
exact language for the folks who are listening. You could probably Google it. Not now, but you can
Not
Google
now.
exactly how he kind of like paraphrased his conclusion in Roe, but it's moronic. And because again, a lot of times they just lack courage. And don't tell me that there are not calls that are made behind the scenes. I mean, I am convinced, I could be wrong, I'm wrong a lot, that Obama tilted the scales on the his Obamacare with Roberts. I'm convinced of that.
Right.
Convinced that the
Yeah.
scales, and I actually believe Roberts already indirectly tried to tilt the scales on Roe by calling out. He's written a few articles. I actually think he's trying to influence Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and what's his face, Kavanaugh.
See, Joe, that's why you and I, Joe Rossinello and Joe Pasillo at on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Not because we wouldn't have had the education, Joe, let's say, had we gone to a big law school. See, but my attitude as an associate Supreme Court justice, if John Roberts said that to me, I'd grab him in the back room and I'd say, you know what? I'm going to punch you in your effing mouth. If you try to bully me in public again, I'm going to punch you in your face. That's why I can never be a Supreme Court justice. And if there was ever a guy that needed to be told, okay, that needed really to be told, hey, man, back down. I don't care if you're the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I'm an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Scalia was an Associate Justice who crushed intellectually John Roberts. Okay. Now I exaggerate a little bit. Okay. I'm not a violent person, but somebody ought to, like Clarence Thomas. I wish Clarence Thomas would tell John Roberts, hey, John, can I talk to you a minute? Shut the F up and stop bullying us in public. We'll vote the way we want. If you don't want to, you deal with the consequences of going with the left. Okay. But I'm here because a conservative president put me here because I'm pro-life. And I'm going to vote that way. I'm going to rule that way because Roe is bad law. And if you bully me again, I'm going to go in public. That's what I would do.
Well, know what it is. I mean, like I said, George Bush knew very well what he was getting into when he chose Roberts. He's just like George Bush. He's an institutional man. The institution works for John Roberts and it works for George Bush, period. Yes. I mean, like, let's be honest. He's not overturning the tables in front of the temple like John Roberts. He's not that guy. And anyone who thinks that, I'm not saying he's like corrupt to the core. Don't get me wrong, but he's a political man. He's an institutional man.
Joe, let me throw this out there too, because the Republican establishment has screwed us so badly as conservatives, particularly on Roe. And this goes back to Sandra Day O'Connor, okay, the supposedly pro-life feminist, okay, nominated by Ronald Reagan. This goes back to Anthony Kennedy, okay, nominated by Papa Bush, okay, David Souter, okay, nominated by Papa Bush, okay. They've stabbed us in the back, you know, so many times. And it's as you said, which is there they threw us a bone that we thought, in my opinion, looking back on it. And again, Joe, I haven't looked at every case. I don't have the time to, okay, because he has stabbed us in the back so often. Not just on social issues, but after the 2020 election, also on political issues, okay, that we wanted him to fight on, and the so-called conservatives, okay. All he has shown himself to be is, you know what, in certain cases where the establishment Republicans want him to go conservative, probably in terms of decisions involving the business community, okay, he'll throw a bone. On social issues, he's an abysmal failure, a horrible, horrible, disgraziad letdown. But I do want to talk, Joe, unless you want to comment on that real quick, because I wanted to talk about the great cloud of witnesses and maybe talk about a few of the people that Austin Ruse in his article pointed out. Because to me, Joe, they're great models, and their tactics to me are things that we should look at. Because again, if Roe is going to get overturned, it's because of these people.
Well, I actually just wanted to make one point. There's an old saying, and it says, man plans, but God laughs at his plans. The reason why the Dobbs case is even in the Supreme Court is because the radical left in states like New Jersey, in states like New York, in states like California, particularly New York, have pushed the abortion issue beyond the palatable average American. Like, I remember hearing 85%, it was stated, I saw it in a clip, McCain on The View. I've said this a number of times. 85% of America, that's overwhelming, are against third trimester abortions. They pushed it too far. And this is something Mike Church has said time and time again, and he is 110% spot on. They overplay their hand. The reason why this is even here is because of what happened in New York by Cuomo. Right. It went too far. And this is how God torpedoes man. You see, this is when all the schemes and all the plans, and all of a sudden you just go too far. Something happens. There's a mistake, and it all collapses. And that's just why we're here. If they were smart, and I've said this time and time again, listen, as you know, I'm not for abortion, any abortion. Dude, I'm not even for sex before marriage. Let me be public about that. Let me say that publicly. And I walked it too. So I'm just telling you. My point is this. People always, dude, where there's an action, there's a reaction. And it simply went too far. And it will go that far in the other states, Joe. I'm telling you right now, because it's just wrong. There's a saying. What do they say? The arc of history bends slow, but it tends to bend towards justice. That's what we're seeing.
Well, you could say that. I mean, slavery as an institution was around for millennia. All right. And unfortunately, slavery still exists in the world today. Not in Europe and America, though, in usually in Muslim parts of the world. But you're right. You're right. The thing about overplaying their hand is that I think we have to remember, E. Michael Jones points this out all the time. Many others do too. God, as he, in his will, passive probably, to allow certain evils to occur, he will draw the greatest good. I want to give you an example of what I mean by that, Joe. If, in fact, America had found an accommodation on abortion on the federal level to allow for abortions nationally to be performed only in the first trimester.
Never going anywhere.
It would never go. And that, you know what? And that accommodation, which I fear, by the way, from conservatives like Ann Coulter and Sean Hannity and people like that, I question whether or not they would. I'm not saying they would. Let me be clear on the Crusade channel. I'm not detracting from Ann Coulter and Sean Hannity, but that conservative mindset to try to find an accommodation on abortion, there is none. My point is that God is drawing the greatest good. And then we're going to talk about some witnesses. And I'm going to segue into that, Joe Rossinello. He draws the greatest good by allowing this to occur and not finding that accommodation, which has caused millions of more babies to die. Okay. God has been raising saints. God has been raising saints because there is no accommodation on abortion. The battle is still raging, and saints have popped up, or maybe people who in the future will be saints, but people who show what you said earlier. They have courage. They certainly have more courage than members of our Supreme Court.
Well, talk a little bit about it. I know he mentions like three.
Well, he mentioned a lot more. But one I want to mention in particular, Nellie Gray, because the March for Life is because of her, okay? And the thing is, if you told me, now she served in the government, Department of State, Department of Labor, when abortion was imposed on us, okay, in 1973. She's the one who had the idea of a yearly march in Washington. Now, catch this. To mark the darkest of days. You mentioned earlier, it happens in the winter. Yeah, we don't wait till the weather's nice. I notice all the little pro-abortion crazies down at Planned Parenthood in New York, when the weather gets too cold, they kind of stay home. Okay, Nellie Gray specifically said we're going to march on the date that Roe was decided. Okay, and Joe, the one time I went, okay, it was bitter cold and snowing, and I don't say that in some sort.
No, I get it.
It's not like marching, in Florida in 80-degree weather. And marching is great no matter where it is, but it's a cross. It absolutely is. And those people, God bless them. That's why there's so much grace at the march. But my point is this: Nellie Gray was a normal person, just like us, just like everybody out there who's listening to us at the front line with Joe and JoJo. She was just a woman who saw the handwriting on the wall, horrified that the Supreme Court would do this. And she said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to march every year. And we see the amount of people, Joe, frig CNN and MSNBC, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Now, see, that's great. That's great witness. Okay. She really doesn't have to do anything else. I know some Catholics say, yeah, but she could do this. And I don't really care. Others can do that. Nellie Gray founded the March for Life. The March for Life kept annual attention, aside from what went on the rest of the year. But every year, more and more and more and more people went to the March for Life and kept that issue alive. Joe, she is a great witness. She's not a general in an army, okay? She's not the president of the United States. She's just a regular person. And look what she did.
Well, you know, it's funny you mention that, because like we interview a lot of different people, particularly on our Veritas show. And like we have an interview coming up very shortly with Burke. What's his name?
Dan Burke.
Dan Burke from the what's it called? The Avila Foundation. I mean, dude, an amazing organization. There are so many people like that we interview that are just like you said. And it's like what St. Paul said, they have gifts and they use them. You see, that's what every baptized person is supposed to do. Now, not everyone is going to do what Joe and I do, and that's okay. Not everyone's going to do what Dan Burke did, but that's okay.
Right.
You can do something. And that is our call as baptized Catholics, both men and women, young and old. And God is going to call us to that task. I'm telling you this right now. I actually believe this. It was Peter Kreeft that said this, who we interviewed as well. And one of his statements, you know, he's written many, many books. And he said, when we die, the only I guess thing we'll regret is the fact that we didn't become a saint. And we'll see what we could have done when we face the Lord. What was the potential. We're all called to be saints. We're all called to be holy. It's a matter of your will.
Right.
And everyone could do something. And we've met so many people, Joe, regular people. Take Alan Smith. Alan Smith is a furnace. He works on piping, industrial piping in Canada. The man's amazing. Amazing what he does with Fulton Sheen. He's a blue collar guy. He has a radio show. He has millions of people he's touched. All because he surrendered his will to God. Why can't you do that? Why can't I do that?
And the thing is too, and I'm guilty of this, you know, when I was, and still am certainly very zealous for the faith, but when I first started getting back to the faith and practicing it, you know, Joe, I want to change the world. I want to convert everybody. Not God goes like that. Not the way it works. Yes, I'm going to use you. But I'll use you in a way I want. I look at somebody like this wonderful woman. Her name is Marianne. She was a lawyer, Joe. Okay. And I don't say that in a way like lawyers are so impressive, but she was a very, very accomplished attorney making money. Okay. She quit because in her heart of hearts, she knew her role in life was to stand every single day in front of Greater Planned Parenthood until it shut down. Okay. That woman's there every day. Joe, I can't tell you, she would never want me to say this. All right. But I'll tell you. And I met her about maybe 5 times. I prayed with her once on a weekday when she was doing the like a 12-hour stretch in front of the abortion clinic. Amazing woman. Joe, she's a simple woman. I don't say simple pejoratively. I say simple in a complimentary way. She's single focused, saving babies, telling those women that go in there, you don't need to do this. Jesus loves you. Okay. They see her rosary. They see her son. She's been mocked. She's been spit at. She's been attacked. She's been cursed at. She's there every day. You want to talk about greatness and holiness and why? And this is my larger point. I'm going to kick it back to you. Obviously, Nellie Gray was in a state of grace. Okay. Just like Father Paul Marks, who Austin Ruse points out. Joe Scheidler died recently. Okay. These are all monsters of the pro-life movement, giants of the pro-life movement, and they're more well known. Marianne is the same. That's the great cloud of witnesses, okay, where lives were saved and souls were saved because of that woman's prayers, because she does what we always say on the show, and what you in particular always say: keep it on the basics. She goes down there and prays the rosary every day. It's
Dude, the
amazing.
basics, dude, that's what our faith, and I'll tell you, I will end it with this. And this is sometimes when I get frustrated. It's very sad. I mean, I'm an observer on social media. I do participate mostly by putting the gospel and religious things on my Facebook. I air our interviews, but I don't really get too into it. I'll comment on a friend's, make a joke, but I do look. We argue about foolishness. It's foolish and it's
Yes.
sad. It's sad. Stick to the basics. God will move your heart. Work on opening your heart. Number
Right.
one, go to confession regularly, pray the rosary, and receive the Eucharist. God will take care of the rest. He'll change you. In doing simple things, we argue about nonsense. I see comments, dude. I swear, Joe, I just shake my head.
Right.
Not that I'm above it, because I have made them in myself and I think them. So, not that but we have to concentrate. First things. I'm telling you, if we did that as a Catholic population in America, we would change. Jesse Ramiro, the 5 Stones of David. I love it. We did a great interview with him. Confession, the Eucharist, read the scripture, pray the rosary daily, and fast.
Joe,
Simple fast.
can I chime in on that? I'm going to. I'm a week late because I just moved to Arizona. I got here last week. I'm starting this week with a fraternity back in Connecticut. Okay, a couple guys I did it with before. Going to do Exodus 90. Men in particular. Okay, it's a program for men. If you want to do what Joe was just talking about, if you want a regime, not like the Biden regime in the good way. You know what I mean, Joe Resinello? Prayer, fasting, exercise, self-denial, discipline. Look at Exodus 90. Okay, we get nothing. It's not a promo or an ad for Exodus 90, but I recommend it. I'm starting it this week, and I'm going to go strong. I'm really going. But it only comes with prayer. You can only do that with prayer, and that's what Joe Resinello is saying: to stay in a state of grace. Joe, we'll end it with this. I think it's very important that our audience know, because we love Austin Ruse. Joe, we're gonna have him on the show soon, I'm sure, right? We gotta get Austin back. The guy's making it happen at CFAM. He's really in the belly of the beast at the United Nations, fighting the pro-life fight at the UN. I just want to read this, Joe, and then we'll move on. One could go on and on about the giants of the pro-life movement, the people who kept this issue on the boil in the United States and around the world. Always remember, the day that Roe was handed down, the New York Times announced that the issue had been settled. These folks, and many like them, both living and dead, have ensured there has been no more unsettled issue in American history than the issue of the unborn child. That's a quote. And you know what, Joe? He's spot on.
Absolutely. And he's, like I said, I think he's a giant, and one day will be looked at as such. He is one of those people. I believe that. But let's get to the topic at hand. I know we talked a lot about, obviously, the march, and because it's important. But we wanted to discuss basically the role of men in basically the American abortion Holocaust. And Clement Harold at Crisis Magazine wrote a great article. It said, "Women deserve men who oppose abortion." I just want to read an excerpt from that. And I think, to be honest with you, he's spot on in so many ways. And I think it'll be a great discussion. Basically, what he has to say is, there remains another, less commonly discussed dimension of Roe v. Wade, namely the catastrophic moral and spiritual failure of men, especially Christian men, who have stood on the sidelines for so long. In the name of choice, we consent to a line of thinking that turns mothers and fathers into moral monsters, violently destroying the one relationship, the relationship between a parent and their vulnerable child, that ought to be the most sacred. Our offspring must die, we tell ourselves, so that we can truly live. The state of affairs is quite amiable to the selfish men who dominate our present society, particularly predictably, it was an all-male court which gave Roe, and it is primarily men who have perpetrated the culture of death in this nation, whether it be through the courts, the White House, Hollywood, media, or the porn industry. Why? Because in our biological constitution, we men realize that a path of radical irresponsibility lies constantly open before us. In our fallen nature, we find ourselves to be capable of profound self-centeredness. And in this context, abortion appears as the guarantee of our freedom to enjoy relationships without commitment and sex without consequences. In reality, what the abortion lobby and their allies seek is innocuous masculinity, a masculinity that fails to assert itself despite itself, a masculinity that extols its own self-indulgence, fears its own fertility, and perpetuates a pathetic, pornified culture solely concerned with empowering selfish adults to pursue whatever pleasures they like without risk or consequence. He is spot on. Spot on.
I mean, if you needed a description, an appropriate description of the problems that we have in America, okay, Joe? Because you can hear the feminists out there when we say things like this at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. You can hear them saying, you must hate women. No, you hate women who disagree with you. So, Joe, your wife, my wife, we have many. Mary's in the chat room, Barbara's in the chat room, Katie's in the chat room. These are all good women. The feminists hate them too. We don't. And we don't hate feminists. We just hate bad ideas. And the feminists are chock full of bad ideas. Okay. So we don't hate them. But they would make it seem like, you know, here we go. You want to assert yourself as a man. In other words, you want to keep women in chains. Okay. No, well, I'll tell you what. If you want me as a man, you want me to consider myself to be a male of the species. Okay. If I turn around to you, if I was to, let's say when I was single and in my stupid days, if I impregnated a woman, you want me to just say what? Oh, okay. I'll take you down to the abortion clinic and we'll just get rid of it. No, I don't kill my kid. What are you talking about? I'm going to tell you a personal story one time, Joe. All right. And I don't mind saying it because my life is an open book. All right. I was in a relationship prior to getting married, just going back a long time ago in another life. And the woman came up to me one day and said, and I'm not saying this in a braggadocious way. I'm just saying what I know was in my heart. She said, I think I'm pregnant. I said, when we get married, abortion? What do you like? There's no. Now, she never was, okay? But my point is, a real man says, no, you don't kill your kid. You don't kill my kid. You know how many men, Joe, have consented to the death and destruction, dismemberment of their own kids in the womb? And then we blame the women, all right? The women who, let's say, for argument's sake, have imbibed as much tripe that comes from Planned Parenthood and the left and everything else. But the men who turn around who wouldn't say that, you like you're saying that's in this, this article. These guys that call themselves, they're macho, Joe, they're macho. Usually they're all tatted up nowadays, right? They got piercings all over the place. They're all tatted up. What is it with 20-year-olds wearing beards? What do they think? They're King David? Go shave your face. I want to tell some of these kids, okay? Like they want to be hipsters. They want to be, they want to be the cool guys. And then when you go out and get a girl pregnant, it's like, we'll go down to Planned Parenthood. We'll go get rid of it. We'll take care of it. Well, then you know what you are? You're not a man. You might be able to kick my butt, maybe because you're 25 and I'm 55, all right? And you got more muscles than me. But that's not the measure of your manhood, okay? The bottom line is you're not a man. C.S. Lewis said it best. We expect virtue in men, but we build men without chests.
But the thing is, that's our society. They bought the lie. I mean, you touched on it perfectly. A man, to be honest with you, is Al Bundy in the culture. He's in front of the television. He's not working. His hands are in his pants. He's drinking beer. I mean, all the quote unquote tough guys, the guys in the bar on Saturday all day who are not with their families, not with their kids. I mean, the thing is, I remember hearing the Catholic gentleman guy, I forget his name. He's the one who started that whole blog. Being a man, to be honest with you, in terms of like the St. Joseph model, dude, it's boring. You take the garbage out every night. You're home after work. You help your wife with the dishes. You basically people, and that's mocked. You see, but you know something? Those are the men. Like there's a skewed version of what's a man in this society. Skewed.
Hmm.
The guy that spends all day Saturday and Sunday away from his family, spending his hard-earned money at a bar at $6 a pint for beer, spending, and he's not even making a lot of money.
Joe, it's been a long time since you've been in a bar. The beer's not costing
Well,
$6
well,
anymore.
I don't even know, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, that's the idea, cursing and swearing and acting,
Yeah.
who will fight over the slight of his football team. Meanwhile, he doesn't stand up for his wife in terms of his behavior. I'm not talking about being like fighting in the street. I'm talking about just coming home, spending his money on his family, like taking care of his kids,
Right.
being there, watching TV with your kids, cartoons on Saturday. You know, it's
Joe, any
skewed.
woman, I'm going to be honest with you. And thank God, I mean, our wives, who are sisters, everybody out there knows Joe and I are brothers-in-law. As we're speaking to you on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Joe, I'm sorry. Back in the day, I had a different worldview, but because, as St. Paul said, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought like a child, but when I became a man, because that's what we're talking about, right, Joe Rossinello? We're talking about men. And Paul hit the nail on the head. It's a line that always stuck with me, perhaps because Paul was talking to me. Okay. When I became a man, I learned to put away childish things.
But Joe, that's not what's going on.
No, but that's what I'm saying. But my larger point, and I'll kick it over to you, is that our wives, and I dare say, and I know this for certain, any of the women that are listening to us right now, and I would say more than, I don't believe the radical feminists or even those who sympathize with them are more than half the women in America. Let's be generous and say half. They don't respect these guys. These real women out there, they don't respect these tough guys. You want to know why? I'm going to give you an example. Who would you rather have? Okay, if you had the Red Army, the Chinese Communist Party army, okay, about to invade America, who would you rather have? The hipsters going out and fighting that war, or the guy who gets up every day and takes care of his wife and kids? Because guess what? My life is in a lot better hands, infinitely better hands, with the guy who's taking care of his wife and kids for one reason and one reason alone. And this applies to the World War II generation, those who fought in Korea, Vietnam, World War I. The difference is, Joe, these kids, they don't bother, like you said. They'll pick up their fist to punch somebody in the face because they slighted the New York Jets while they're pounding scotch in the bar. But if we were getting invaded by the Chinese army, they would expect all those guys that they make fun of, you go out and fight the war.
But even you don't even have to talk about the war. I'm just talking about standing up for your family.
No, but I'm talking about the spirit of or the sacrificial, the self-sacrificing.
Of course, but I don't even think it has to go to the point of a war. I'm talking about, why aren't you home? What are you doing in that bar? Like, what are you doing there? You're married. I'm not saying you can't go out and have a drink or 2 drinks, but what I'm saying is, like, you spend all day Saturday, you spend all day Sunday.
Joe, how about the guys with wives and kids that are in their room playing video games all day?
Well, that's another story. I mean, because here's the thing: abortion is about sex, and here's another thing: we have a distorted view of women. I mean, I have 2 daughters, and what I'm going to tell them straight out: any man who wants to sleep with you before he's married to you, I'm telling you this right now, he doesn't love you. Any man that, because you'll say, yes, I do. No, you don't. You don't know what love is. You don't know what love is. That's the problem. We live on the superficial level, and that's why divorces happen. Love hurts. And I'm not talking about Jay Giles here. I'm talking about love is sacrificial. Like, we have men who are simply not willing to sacrifice. They look at marriage as far as what I'm going to get out of it.
Right.
Wrong. It's what you're going to give to it. And here's another thing: women are no better. They're no better. You see, our society is not looking at it properly. And because they look at, I could remember having a conversation with someone I went to college with, a woman.
Hmm.
and we were talking about contraception, and I was telling her, like, I wasn't married, and frankly I was living in a chaste state. I was practicing Catholic. The church says you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. Well, I wasn't. And I was talking to her. I knew her from college. I was at like one of my reunions, and she was married to someone I knew from my college. And I said, Lisa, if you're contracepting, you're using each other. It's basically, and it wasn't meant in a slight. I'm not trying to slight her. We were just talking, and
Right.
she's like, I know that. I'm fine with it.
Right. Right,
You're
Joe.
fine with it.
Right.
Like, but this is the society. We have a skewed idea of first of all, there is no such thing as dating. It's simply just sex. It's a skewed idea. We use each other as like, and basically the child, and that's why I love this piece by Clement Harold in Crisis Magazine. He basically says it's pitted men and women against each other.
Against each other. Exactly right. Remember something, Joe, it's always an assault on Christianity. Okay. Because what is that antithetical to? The words of Christ when he said, the man leaves his mother and cleaves to his wife and vice versa, and the two become one. It is a direct assault on the Christian message. I wish Christians would get their collective heads out of their butts and start listening to the things that people say. That's a direct assault on the direct words of Christ when it comes to the nature of the relationship between a husband and a wife. It is the opposite of it. Now, I want to comment real quick, Joe, only because Mary actually, or no, not Mary, KC Royals fan in the chat room on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online, brought it up. KC's with us today. Hey, KC, how you doing? She said birth control is poison. And I really wasn't going to bring it up, but I do want to comment, Joe, because I love your comments on it. You know why? Because Bishop Sheen actually there's a quote from Bishop Fulton Sheen that I think ties into a lot of the conversations we have about logos, about the order of things. So it's really what we're talking about, the rationale, the order of things, the order of sexuality. I love your comments on this because she hits it on the head. She's exactly right, KC Royals fan. Knows abortion needs to come to an end. But here's the thing that the conservatives don't want to hear, Joe. Contraception does too. Fulton Sheen said, the root principle of birth control is unsound. It's the glorification of the means and the contempt of the end. It says that the pleasure, which is a means to the procreation of children, is good, but the children themselves are no good. In other words, to be logical, the philosophy of birth control would commit us to a world in which trees would be always blooming but never giving fruit, a world of signposts leading nowhere. In this cosmos, every tree would be a barren fig tree, and for that reason, this is the important part, would have upon it the curse of God. Close quote.
But we have to look at, when you want to look at it that way, first of all, that'll never happen in America. It would take an act of God. Politically speaking, it could happen. And in fact, that's the only way it would happen, to outlaw birth control, because no one's touching that. That would be an act of God. But let's just talk about the American model of marriage right now. This is across the board from Hawaii to Maine. You get married. You buy a house you can't afford. You have 2 cars you can't afford. You have 2 incomes. You have no time. And then a kid comes and you say, I can't afford another, because you built your life on material things. You see, we have everything skewed. If people lived a little bit more modestly, we could have children. But we don't. The model, and this is across all the classes, from the working class up to the wealthy class, that's how people live. Why? Because we're building our heaven on earth. You see, we don't know where we're going. Our world, this isn't it. We're not. A person who believes in Christ knows that. Now, that doesn't mean you live in a box, but what it does mean is those superfluous things don't matter.
Joe, you want a
And
great
that's not
example?
an American idea, Joe.
No, no, it's not. I'm going to give you a great example. Again, I'm Joe. I'm telling you something. Aside from you, your wife, and being just blessed in general to have met my wife, without that happening, I would have never met you. I probably wouldn't be here at the front line. Wouldn't be here at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. My wife and I have prayed for more Catholic friends, and I love my friends, even those that are not practicing. I love them to death. Okay, but I need support. I'm one of
We
those
all
guys. I'm
do.
not. I'm not a loner. I think we all need support. That's why I'm doing Exodus 90. You can't do Exodus 90 and get through that regime if there's not a fraternity of men to communicate with and to bounce, your experience off of. I got a couple friends of mine. One of the reasons we decided to move to Arizona is because we had a couple friends here. Joe, I'm talking about super duper wealthy. I'm not talking about, successful, owned a pizzeria for 30 years, socked away maybe $3-4 million. I'm talking super duper wealthy. Okay. They live in couple nice homes. Okay. They live in 2 states. Okay. Nothing earth shattering, couple condos, you know what I mean? Couple of 3-bedroom condos. They both drive a nice vehicle. And I've never seen the less pretentious people who could wear that wealth on their sleeve. Another rich guy would tell my friend, "Hey, what are you doing? Why don't you have a $5 million mansion? Why aren't you living in Southern California, living in Beverly Hills? Blah, 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 blah." That's a Catholic witness. This guy can afford anything, and his wife, they could afford anything they want. And you know what they do? They got a couple of nice homes. They don't live like paupers, but they use their money prudentially. And I can't even tell you what they do for the church. In other words, on a bunch of different levels. See, to me, if I ever had money, okay, I would want to model myself on that. Like if I ever had like a decent amount of money, don't know. Maybe Joe and I will become a nationally syndicated radio show and we'll make Rush Limbaugh money. Maybe not. I don't know. But I would
Or
want to
maybe we'll
live
go to
that kind.
prison.
Yes, exactly. But like I think that's a tremendous witness. And I say it because Joe, you want to know something? As we always say on the show, Christ was countered the narrative of the time. Okay, we as Catholics in America need to counter the narrative. That couple that I just described, they are countercultural. They counter the narrative. They don't wear their wealth on their sleeve. They use their money appropriately. They use their money for the greater glory of God. Okay, good church-going Catholics. Okay, and I dare say they will be going to heaven. That's the kind of, if I ever had money, and even without money, I want to live that kind of life. Keep it
Well,
real. Keep it at the basics, okay? And take care of your family, okay? That doesn't mean, like you said, you live in a box. You can enjoy yourself, okay? But at the end of the day, I think we need to have discipline and we need to establish priorities. And the man is supposed to be the one that really spearheads that.
well, again, we have a skewed vision of masculinity as well as femininity. That's unarguable. And frankly, it stems again the denominator in all our problems is we don't have a relationship with God. You see, when God comes first, everything falls into place. Everything. Your
Mm.
money, your relationships, your wife, your kids, everything. That doesn't mean you're perfect by no means, but all your priorities fall into place. We have a skewed, I mean, you just look at commercials, you look at how people dress, how they comport with like the law. I mean, what's permitted, what's socially permitted.
Joe
We
Rossinello, I thought about you the other night, and this is going to sound crazy why I thought about you, because I thought about the front line with Joe and Joe. I was working at the restaurant that I work in now in my new location, right? A girl walked in. She was basically dressed in a bikini at night in a high-end restaurant, okay, in Arizona. She was dressed in a bikini. That's what we're dealing with in America. And the men sit there and they just love it. Oh, why don't you let her in? I don't know, because we don't let naked women into the restaurant. How about that? How about that for an idea? But I use that, Joe, as
no,
an
it's a
example.
perfect example. I mean, like, it's a perfect example. This is where we're at. I mean, like, and this is why we have abortion. This is
Yeah.
why families fall apart. Like, there's a consequence to everything. And frankly, we're not focused. We're living our life. Our actions say this. This is heaven. I'm going to get everything I can now.
Mm.
It doesn't work that way, guys. I'm
Joe.
telling you this right now. You won't have a good life
Mm.
either. You see, that's another thing. It's like basically eating Twinkies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. After a while, the frigging the white fake whipped cream gets a little nauseating.
That's right. And the arteries start to clog up. I will say this, and again, I understand it. One of the things I want to give you a couple quotes, show a quick comment, because then I want you to finish it up. We only have about 3 or 4 minutes left. I would encourage, while everybody is here, Joe and I and Jonathan Ross, we ask you to do 2 things, okay? First and foremost, the frontlinetv.com. You could subscribe and support us that way. There's a lot of great content on there. I'm not going to give you the long-winded spiel. And Joe and I both subscribe to the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. It's not a either or proposition. Okay. We have to support the people who are in the breach. We're in the breach. My church and the Crusade channel are in the breach. We'd ask you to support us. If you want to support us, please, thefrontlinetv.com. Joe, here's the thing. You talk about consequences. I'm going to hand it over to you and then bring it to an end. There are weak men. Why? Because we're so strong? No, because we allow God to make us strong. There are very weak men out there. The consequences to us not standing up in 2 ways. One, trying to encourage some of these effeminized men to start acting like men. And number 2, to actually defeat in the culture war, the feminized men. Jordan Peterson had it right. We covered him a few months ago, okay? And we had a conversation about him. He said, quote, "If you think tough men are dangerous, wait till you see what weak men are capable of." Now, I don't agree. I'm not one of these Jordan Peterson sycophants out there. He says a lot of very smart and correct things. That's one of them. If you want to see a disaster in this world, let the weak men take over, as they have been, by the way, in this culture war, which we are trying to gain that ground back, okay, and go on the offensive. You think tough men are the problem? Weak men are the problem. Joe Arsenello, I'm going to hand it over to you for a final thought.
Well, ultimately, strength comes from supernatural grace. I mean, like, we have a skewed version of what is strong and what is weak. I mean, in the culture. And that's why you have to live a sacramental life. The sacraments, when you live a sacramental life, elevate your nature. Now, what does that mean? You're going to fly? No. It means that you'll be virtuous. It means that you will live up to your vows in your marriage. It means that you will, treat others as you want to be treated. It gives you the strength to live a Christian life. And that's where we are lost, because our society has put God away. And here's the thing, Joe, and I'm going to tell you this right now. I don't care if you're like the UFC, like heavyweight champion. Dude, I got news for you. You don't have God in your life, you're not going to live a virtuous life, because we're all weak. No, it's not in a sense. We're made of flesh and bone. Without God, you will fail.
Right.
You will fail. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care if you're the heavyweight champion of the world. You will fail.
Right.
And our society has not put that together for 2,000 years. The sacraments give you supernatural grace to be a man of courage, to live up to your vows, and frankly, to be the person you were born to be. Without that, you're not going to do it. It's like reading a self-help book. Tells you the right thing, you're not going to execute.
Not going to happen. And Joe, that's a great place to end. I want to thank you all. We want to thank you all. We're not going to do our normal after show that we do on social media, but we want to thank you all at the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Again, we encourage everyone to subscribe to the Crusade channel, crusadechannel.com. Kick the tires. You can listen for free for a while. So you know us at Frontline with Joe and Joe, the Frontline with Joe and Joe, or the Frontline TV.com, and you could subscribe to our channel. We would encourage you to do so. Great conversation, Joe. We got to keep fighting the fight. Bishop Olmsted, my new bishop, Bishop Olmsted, he's the one who said get in the breach. That's where we are. That's where we all have to be, because we cannot let those who are weak win in this culture war, not only for ourselves, but for our children. So we want to thank you all for joining us, and remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening.